The China-WHO joint mission said it hasn't discovered the origin of COVID-19 after its investigation in Wuhan, but that it is extremely unlikely the virus leaked from a lab there. Why is tracing the source so important, and what are the next steps? The UK has introduced a so-called new visa scheme for Hong Kong British nationals overseas to gain permanent residence and citizenship. What's the impact on Hong Kong's political security? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The World Health Organization mission said it is extremely unlikely that the coronavirus leaked from a lab in Wuhan, and the city's Huanan seafood market may not have been the site of the earliest COVID-19 outbreak. The China-WHO joint mission, which consists of 17 Chinese experts and 17 experts from 10 other countries, concluded their China part study on the origin of the coronavirus. The WHO experts arrived in Wuhan on January the 14th for a tracing mission with help from Chinese experts. Now, researchers in China have also carried out a sweeping check on domestic poultry and wild animals in Hubei province and other places. So what has been the finding of the joint mission, and what are the significance of these findings? Joining me today is Professor Zhiwei from the Center for Public Health Research, Medical School of Nanjing University, via Skype from Nanjing, and Einar Tangen here in the studio. He is an independent political affairs commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So, Peter Ben, a member of the WHO China joint team, said at a joint press conference on February the 9th in Beijing that findings of the team suggests that the laboratory incidence hypothesis is extremely unlikely to explain the introduction of the virus to the human population, and that there was also spread among individuals that were not linked to the Huanan seafood market. Liang Wannian, a member of the team, said we cannot say it was the starting point of the epidemic. So, Professor Wu, let's break it down one by one. First of all, this hypothesis, this what has been circulating from the White House, from the former U.S. president to the former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about, the origin of the virus being a leak from this lab in Wuhan. Is that closed for now?
I definitely believe so. The conspiracy theory about this virus leaking from a laboratory, actually, from very beginning, it wasn't really supported by any scientific evidence, and was not supported by the scientific community either. So I don't really think that actually has a stand at all. But this WHO team investigation, which actually runs almost 4 weeks, had a very broad, far-reaching, comprehensive investigations touching various aspects of this virus. I think we should close this chapter, and we should allocate all our resources to other aspects and origin of this virus. So it's very significant.
The reason why I highlight this, because this has been one of the most exposed or most talked about theories, especially, as I said, being promulgated by former U.S. President Trump and Pompeo. Basically, they said it last April, and they even said that they had seen credible evidence that this was the case, and they had never been able to provide such evidence, and yet this theory was making rounds around the world, and it was just impossible and I talked to the lab, to the chief virologist in the lab, and she was also outraged that this was the kind of thing they have to prove to themselves. Einar, finally, we're hearing the World Health Organization mission saying it is extremely unlikely that this was part of a lab leak. What do you make of the saga that we have been witnessing so far?
Well, I think you have to break it down. What it amounts to is that Donald Trump, after saying that he thought China was doing a wonderful job, that the U.S. was prepared, was caught unprepared. And then he needed a quick scapegoat, and that was China, claiming that this was the China virus, ramping up the vitriol and things like this. So it was not based on science, as you pointed out. There has been no credible evidence presented to support any of these theories. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who don't care about facts or science. Many people believe that the coronavirus doesn't even exist.
The team also said they will not study this hypothesis in the future. What's the implication of that, Professor Wu? Does that mean that from now on that possibility is completely ruled out?
Yes, definitely is. I think this says very clearly that this is not something the WHO or the global scientific community should pursue to find out the origin of the virus.
Concerning that fact, were there any specific or significant findings from the WHO-China joint mission that they announced during the press conference, Professor Wu?
Well, this is actually the hard part, because finding an intermediary species in transmitting the virus from the wild to human beings actually is always very hard, and usually you do not get a very conclusive outcome.
One of the questions on people's mind is the location. You know, the location where the virus first emerged or first jumped from nature onto human species, onto human bodies. Einar, from your understanding from what was said during that presser, was there any progress, any further finding that the team were able to make, or was it still open question, or maybe more question asked?
Well, they focused on the fact that there could have been a spread through frozen meats that were sent. And the reason is that bats are not native to Wuhan, and they were not being sold in the market, contrary to everything everyone had said. There's no such thing as bat soup down there. But what they do know is that intermediary animals, badgers and also kind of ferret-like animals, were in fact frozen and were sold in the market. And these are animals that are within that environment where they could be infected by bats. So that was their main takeaway from this. That was the first thing that they mentioned, that frozen foods from these areas could have in fact been the contamination line. They also talked about a reservoir, a direct contamination, but they couldn't find anything along that line. And as it said before, they really did not think that it had anything to do with the virus lab.
Professor Wu, what about this sentence that there was also spread among individuals that were not linked to the Huanan seafood market? What's the implication of that? This was being said by the Chinese member of the joint mission. He mentioned this, whereas the WHO scientists focused more on wildlife that was being farmed in China, of course, because they're looking at this in China, and you know, they were talking about any finding along that line. And yet this detail that was given by the Chinese member of the team, saying while there were cases associated with the Huanan seafood market, there are other cases at the same time in the city of Wuhan that had no direct link to the market. What's the implication of that? What does that tell us that scientists still have to look into?
Well, you see, this is one of the complicated issues. You know, the virus may be introduced from multiple sources. As we now realize that, you know, the seafood market is probably just one of the sources. Actually, if you look at it recently, is that once you have a very sensitive diagnostic or detection methods, actually you found in the imported cold chain seafood, cold chain products, and even in some kind of a normal imported products, actually in the packaging, you can still find the viral nucleic acids. So that suggests that, you know, there could be some other sources which actually carry the virus into or getting into close contact with human and then mediate the transmission.
And I want to just add on that. One of the things he mentioned was a human spread, because there were reports of incidents prior to the Wuhan market outbreak in the surrounding area with the same identifiers. So they're looking into that as well.
Well, there are also reports, and not just from one country, but from different countries, which point to the possibility that the virus might have been present in those countries prior to the official date that they recorded the first known case of COVID-19. I mean, nobody's making up these stories, right? If people look into the internet, they will find, and it's reported by medical journals, by trusted media in different parts of the world, pointing to earlier dates where they didn't know, but actually when the samples collected from those period of time now are testing positive with COVID-19. And yet that has been interpreted as some kind of Chinese campaign to divert attention and insinuating that the source did not come from China, that China wants people to believe that the source come from somewhere else. Professor Wu, how do you look at the position of the Chinese government on this issue? Are they trying to frame public opinion in a way that insinuate that the virus must have come abroad, or are they saying, let us wait for scientific conclusion and not exclude any possibility at this moment?
Well, actually, I think it's very clear. I don't see the Chinese government trying to frame this or point to other countries. Actually, although there are there are a lot of evidence that the virus were identified earlier than December 2019, such as in France and in the US as well. But this is something actually we need to do a lot more science and get scientific evidence. I think this is the right attitude that we don't need to or we don't have to put that into a political context that which country starts. It's not something you're going to blame. The key issue is that we're trying to find where this virus actually came from. When you have a pandemic, the starting place doesn't necessarily mean that's the origin of the virus. So I think this is something actually we need international cooperation and collaboration on this issue, and look at the virus sequences, to look at the timeline of the transmission and development of the disease. I mean, that would help us a lot in trying to develop public health approach to contain the virus.
Well, if you look at the latest New York Times article, and I'm going to quote the title of it, which says, China scores a public relations win after WHO mission to Wuhan. It said the WHO by design is beholden to its member countries and has long struck a diplomatic tone in dealing with the Chinese government, which is notoriously resistant to outside scrutiny. Einar, how does that look to you? It seemed to suggest that, if the WHO has find some things which are not deviating, which are not, different from the Chinese position, then it must have been beholden to the influence of China. How do you look at this kind of headline?
Well, you can always make up your mind before you hear the facts. I think the New York Times has made it quite clear that they hold China responsible. But I have a slightly different take on all of this. Let's say it was started in France. Would that change the millions of people who have died or the economic consequences of all of that, what we have talked about? The issue is not where it comes from. We've had 9 separate viral incidents since SARS. They have originated from the United States, from Africa, from different parts. The fact is we need, as a world, to come together and figure out how we deal with these effectively, not as has been done in Europe and the United States, where quite frankly, they have allowed the spread and therefore new variants to crop up. Where is the outrage about that?
Moving ahead, Professor Wu, where will these missions go in order to really find out what happened to the early stage of this coronavirus, exactly where it came from? What is your understanding of their line of work?
Well, we do have a lot of experience in basically trying to identify the virus origins and how they were transmitted. I think, as I just mentioned, that we need to sit down with other countries, the scientific community, look at the sequences, look at how the virus were transmitted, how it was identified, and where was the first cases identified, and etc. Things like that.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhiwei, joining us from Nanjing, eastern China's Jiangsu province, and Einar Tangen joining us here in the Beijing studio.